Tunisia and the European Union have signed a strategic partnership agreement that will focus on irregular migration and try to combat human trafficking. For this, Brussels has provided Tunisia with €100 million of EU funding. Tunisia is a departure point for thousands of migrants crossing the Mediterranean to Europe every year. President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who traveled to Tunisia with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, welcomed the agreement.
We will cooperate on border management, anti-smuggling, return and addressing root causes in full respect of the international law. Equally important is our work to facilitate legal, regular migration.
More than 75,000 migrants have arrived in Italy since the start of the year, a jump from some 31,000 people who arrived in the country in all of 2022.
The war in Ukraine looks likely to become a bone of contention at the EU-Latin America summit that starts in Brussels on Monday. The last meeting of its kind took place 8 years ago now, and similar to back then, the aim is to relaunch both political and economic relations. More than 60 leaders will take part in the meeting, but positions on the conflict in Ukraine vary either side of the Atlantic.
Latin American countries have been quite hesitant in condemning Russia for a variety of reasons. One of those has to do with a more pragmatic approach. Latin American countries have their own economic ties with Russia and cannot simply cut those ties because of a war that, in their view, is happening in Europe. At the same time, they also have their own reason that comes from a tradition of being global South countries that have taken quite a solid approach of neutrality.
This divergence in views is complicating the drafting of a joint statement set to be published at the end of the summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will not be attending the meeting, but experts say it should serve above all to advance some of the EU's pending trade agreements, like updates to those with Chile and Mexico. The same goes for the much-anticipated Mercosur deal, with Europe still holding out for the inclusion of tougher environmental commitments.
If you take the different trade agreements that we have been discussing with the different countries of Latin America for many years, the best way of making sure that the standards for the environment are respected in Latin America is advancing and signing and ratifying those agreements. If we want Latin America to turn their backs to Europe and to look to other partners that don't share the same concern with the environment, then we just have to put them on the side.
Brussels wants to promote large-scale investment in the continent. It says it will allocate €10 billion towards this, and Spain €9.4 billion, which it hopes will be complemented by aid from other countries. And this is all with a clear objective: to reconquer one of the world's richest territories in terms of critical raw materials.
Russia claims to have shot down 10 drones in occupied Crimea on Saturday. The attack, according to Moscow, included aerial and underwater devices that were targeting Sevastopol, home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. There were no reported casualties or damage. The region has been a regular target of air and naval drone attacks since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said his country has sufficient stockpile of cluster bombs and threatened to use the controversial weapons if Ukraine did the same after Kyiv received a delivery of the bombs from the US. Ukrainian forces are making steady progress along the northern and southern flanks of Bakhmut, which Russian forces have occupied since May. Fighting is also raging in the Zaporizhzhia region, where Ukrainian forces are making minimal gains.
La guerra de Ucrania ha sido un baño de realidad para Occidente, para los planificadores militares, también civiles, relacionados con la defensa, porque es el regreso de la guerra convencional de alta intensidad. Y eso nos ha sacado de 20 o más bien 30 años de falsas nociones o de nociones que no se ajustan a la realidad actual. Y nos está llevando a unas decisiones de calado histórico.
Since last February, international donors have pledged more than 80 billion euros in military aid to Ukraine. But according to experts, some of those weapons, including Leopard tanks and Bradley infantry vehicles, have had a bad start, as weaknesses in old weaponry, such as wheeled tanks, have rendered them obsolete. But those failures could also be down to how the weaponry is being used.
If you had well-trained NATO troops driving French tanks, you would see fewer losses in those tanks in Ukraine, not because the NATO troops are technically more capable with each tank, but because they know how to operate the tanks in conjunction with other systems like artillery systems and infantry. Their communications are better.
The extensive use of drones has been a notable feature of the war in Ukraine, but some argue that communications and electronic warfare could play an even more important role and could help Ukraine win the war.
You see that innovation now. I think it will be even better. Right now, it has to be quick. It has to be improvisation. And what you'll see in a future stabilized conflict is a lot of long-term innovation. And on the Russian side, it's going to take the Russian military 10 or more years to rebuild what they've lost in this war. And what the Russians are taking away is that their systems aren't very good.
Tourists at the Trevi Fountain in Rome. As temperatures soar to record levels, the Italian government has issued a red alert for 16 cities across the country, warning people to avoid direct sunlight between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. And animals in Rome's zoo are being fed frozen food to help keep them cool.
In ogni caso avvertiamo fisicamente proprio insomma, questa calura poi protratta nel tempo, perché non è più per qualche breve periodo come accadeva qualche anno fa, no? Per un paio di giorni. Ormai purtroppo si dilunga per più di un mese questo caldo, quindi diciamo gli effetti si avvertono.
As Europe continues to experience record temperatures, environmental activist Greta Thunberg posted a picture on Twitter saying, "Is this the sign you're looking for?" Meanwhile, on Spanish island of La Palma, the heatwave is being blamed for a massive forest fire. Around 500 people have been forced to move already, with the authorities saying more evacuations may become necessary. Voters in Spain have been lining up to register for postal ballots ahead of the 23rd of July snap general election. The deadline to vote by post has been extended until next Thursday because of the large number of requests, 2.5 million people so far. This is more than double the number that did so in the last election in 2019. More than 270 offices opened on Sunday in Spain's main cities and on the coast to speed up the process. Ballots are also open this weekend in embassies and consulates abroad. The Israeli-occupied West Bank. Officials say a Palestinian gunman opened fire on a car outside a settlement on Sunday, wounding 3 Israelis. A search is underway for the perpetrator, who reportedly fired shots from a passing vehicle. A 35-year-old man is in hospital in a serious but stable condition, while his 2 daughters were lightly injured. The incident is the latest in a cycle of attacks and counterattacks that has gripped the region, driving up the death toll in what is the worst fighting in the West Bank in nearly 2 decades.
A bookstore is facing a record fine in Hungary for selling a graphic novel that depicts an LGBTQ+ coming-of-age story. The chain Lyra is facing a fine of 32,000 euros after it sold the popular British comic Heartstopper in its youth literature section and failed to wrap it in transparent plastic. The fine is the result of a 2021 law forbidding the display of homosexual content to minors. Legislation that critics argue is an attempt to stigmatize the country's LGBTQ+ community, and according to the creative director of Lyra, it is also hard to follow.
Arról lehet értelmesen vitatkozni, hogy egy 3 éves, 4 éves kezében milyen könyvek kerüljenek. Kell-e abba, hogy legyen szexualitás, vagy nem? Teljesen mindegy, hogy milyen fajta szexualitás. De ezt a szülőkre kellene bíznia, hogy egyébként az állam is szokta mondani. Ehhez képest most az állam maga akarja eldönteni, és az pedig teljesen életszerűtlen, hogy 16-17 éves fiatalok helyett valaki más dönteti el, hogy mit olvassanak.
Lyra said that it will fight the fine that came just 2 days before Budapest's annual Pride March.
French media reports Franco-British actress and singer Jane Birkin has died, aged 76, at her home in Paris. A naturalised French citizen, Birkin moved to France in the late 1960s and was probably best known internationally for her relationship with French singer Serge Gainsbourg, with whom she had a daughter, Charlotte. Together, they were an iconic couple who found fame with the unforgettable duet Je t'aime moi non plus in 1969. In 1980, she left Gainsbourg and later married film director Jacques Doillon, long after Gainsbourg's death in 1991. And despite trials such as the death of her daughter Kate in 2013 and a long recovery from leukemia, she continued to sing the work of the man with whom she'd formed a legendary relationship.
Carlos Alcaraz overcame a nervy start to end Novak Djokovic's 34-match winning streak at the All-England Club. The Spaniard won 1-6, 7-6, 6-6, 6-1, 3-6, 6-4 in an engaging back-and-forth final on Sunday, claiming his first championship at Wimbledon and second Grand Slam trophy overall. Alcaraz, who won his first Grand Slam title at the US Open last year, celebrated by falling flat on his face and kicking a ball into the crowd after taking the first match point against Djokovic, who was appearing in the record 35th Grand Slam final.